Coleman, the undergraduate, and Bruce Rosenblum, who's emeritus professor from physics. And I think you took your course, right?
He took
Yeah.
our seminar,
Yeah.
55.
And so out of that generated some discussions, and we decided a debate would be a lot of fun. And the department also has been debating some of these ideas for quite a while, so it's kind of interesting. And so the title of this is Quantum Enigma, the skeleton in the closet of physicists, question mark. And so do you want to start now and then we'll just stop to get the computer going, or do you need that to start?
No, it's expendable anyways.
Okay, so what we'll do, Ben can talk for 15-20 minutes, and then Bruce can talk for 15-20 minutes, and then we can have some replies, and then we'll open it up.
Alright, well, I'm Ben, thanks for coming.
Why don't we turn the light off on the screen?
Alright.
Let me see if I can find that one.
Thanks for coming. Thanks to the physics department. Basically, the book Quantum Enigma by Bruce Rosenblum and Fred Kuttner, who's his co-author, has the subtitle Physics Encounters Consciousness, and it professes immediately on the first page to be a controversial book. They often say that they're trying to reveal the skeleton in the closet of physicists, but what I want to show is that it's really a confusion, or as I like to say, a straw man in the closet. My argument can be stated really shortly. The quantum enigma, as Rosenblum describes it, it doesn't exist because free will is an incoherent and unsupported idea. Now that may sound strange or irrelevant, but I assure you that it stems from Rosenblum's own arguments about the quantum enigma and why it exists.
That. Oh, it's what? Yeah. Oh. Okay. And you don't carry one around? Naughty, naughty, naughty. Bring your adapter here.
Anywho, there's an enigma in physics known as the measurement problem, and I wouldn't deny that. But that isn't the quantum enigma, as Rosenblum thinks that it exists. He thinks something more. I think that Rosenblum adds mystery to mystery by adding another quantum enigma on top of this measurement problem. He thinks that conscious free will somehow allows for a new mystery. David Chalmers, someone that Rosenblum is fond of citing in his book, he has a quote that says, "Perhaps the most popular extra ingredient to consciousness of all is quantum mechanics. The attractiveness of quantum theories of consciousness may stem from what I call a law of minimization of mystery. Consciousness is mysterious, and quantum mechanics is mysterious, so maybe the two mysteries have a common source." So that might be the case in this. On top of that, I think Rosenblum often conflates his quantum enigma with the measurement problem. They're related, certainly, but they're not the same thing. In the book, there's many examples of this, but the clearest comes on page 176, where he states, "Physics encounters consciousness in the quantum enigma, which physicists call the measurement problem." So basically, in an experiment like the box experiment, I assume you'll be going through, and the double slit experiment, which is more famous, one type of measurement leads to finding basically a pattern of particles, and another type of measurement leads to a wave pattern. And the quantum enigma supposedly arises because in the experiment, quote, "we could have chosen to do an experiment other than the one we actually did. This apparent free will of choice causes this quantum enigma, supposedly. But a robot without free will could have done it the exact same way and gotten the same results. The problem arises from the excessively under-supported assertion that, quote, the existence of the quantum enigma depends crucially on free will." This quotation from the book is the foundation of my criticism of quantum enigma. I think most physicists would agree that the measurement problem itself has little or nothing to do with free will. Now, if we take this on its face, that, quote, the existence of a quantum enigma depends crucially on free will, end quote, one would expect a certain amount of rigorous investigation of free will to accompany this claim. The fact is that Rosenblum dedicates less than 2 pages to this discussion of free will. Instead, throughout the book, it's simply presupposed that humans have free will. What is his argument? Well, on page 170, he writes, quote, though it is hard to fit free will into a scientific worldview, we cannot ourselves, with any seriousness, doubt it. J.A. Hobson's comments seem apt to us. He wrote, those of us with common sense are amazed at the resistance put up by psychologists, physiologists, and philosophers to the obvious reality of free will. First of all, I tend to think that Hobson was speaking tongue-in-cheek, discounting psychologists, physiologists, and philosophers on a problem is quite an audacious thing to do. Secondly, this quotation is essentially saying that Rosenblum can't accept the notion that free will is an illusion because of common sense. Physicists of all people should know that our so-called common sense and our intuitions are often skewed and sometimes totally incorrect. Quantum mechanics itself is a perfect example of this. Yet this notion of not trusting our common sense doesn't seem to occur to Rosenblum in relation to free will. The quotation also belies a major problem I see with Quantum Enigma, the book, where physics supposedly meets consciousness. The views of those fields named in the quotation, psychologists, physiologists, and philosophers, are notably absent from the book. I'm going to take another step back and discuss free will now. First of all, this notion that we do not in reality have free will, that free will is an illusion, it's not a new idea. One of the earliest instances I could find is in the Hindu religious text, the Bhagavad Gita, which comes from 1500 BC or earlier. In it, it says, all actions are performed by the constituents of nature. Deluded by his identification with the ego, a person thinks, I am the doer. But the illumined person understands the domain of nature and is not attached. Such people know that the constituents of nature interact with each other, and the people do not claim to be the doer of actions, which is chapter 3, lines 27-28 for those who are interested. A more recent example in Western philosophy comes from Baruch Spinoza, who writes in his book Ethics, quote, experience teaches us no less clearly than reason that men believe themselves to be free, simply because they are conscious of their actions and unconscious of the causes whereby those actions are determined. Part 3, Proposition 2. Now, there's 2 notions of free will that are often used in literature. The first kind we're not talking about today, and that I'm not going to treat here, is the idea that free will in a situation means not being coerced. For example, if I was to do something at gunpoint, I wouldn't have free will in that situation. The kind I am treating here has to do with the idea that our decisions and choices are made entirely freely. Nothing causes us to make these choices. We are not determined to make these choices. They're just completely free. This kind of free will, I think, is incoherent for many reasons. Speaking from the standpoint of physics, it's nonsensical to say that any event of any kind that doesn't have any kind of antecedent causes of any sort. John Searle, the philosopher from Berkeley, writes in his book called Mind. He says, every event that happens in the physical world is determined by preceding physical events. So even if we could prove somehow that we have mental free will, it wouldn't make any difference to the behavior of my body, because the behavior of my body is caused by the preceding states of my body and the rest of the physical universe. Nowadays, we think that quantum physics has shown an indeterminacy in the behavior of particles at the subatomic level. Not everything is determined in the way that classic physics supposed. But that seems to be no help with the free will problem, because the form of quantum indeterminacy is randomness, and randomness is not the same as freedom. The fact that particles at the micro level are not completely determined, and therefore not completely predictable, but only statistically predictable, seems to give no support whatever to our idea that our apparently free actions are really free. Even if our decision-making somehow inherited the indeterminacy of the quantum level events in our brains, that would still not give us free will, but only an unpredictable, random element in our decisions and behavior. It's a long quote. There's an entertaining treatment of the same notion that I'm going to try to